This Gumbands podcast is made possible by the Buell Foundation, serving southwestern Pennsylvania since 1927, and by listeners like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Gumbands. I'm Rick Seaback, and we think everybody in Pittsburgh knows what a gum band is. It's a rubber band, but we like to think that these conversations we're having help to hold Pittsburgh together in some sort of crazy way. We're really happy today to have as our guest Mr. Mark Hauser. And if you've ever done a tour of the rooftops of downtown Pittsburgh, Mark was probably your guide. I always like to start. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Rick.
And I know how I met Mark. I was writing for Pittsburgh Magazine, a column about famous visitors. And my buddy here at work, Minette Seat, who many people know as the host of Filmmakers Corner, Minette said, "Oh, my brother Mike said you need to know that there's a story in the New Yorker about Emmanuel Macron. It's a little profile of Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, the new president of France, the youngest president ever of France." And in that article in the New Yorker, they mentioned a visit of his to Pittsburgh and an incident at Mad Mex on Atwood Street.
That's right.
Sadly, that Mad Mex is closed.
I know. I just drove by it the other day and shed a little tear.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Mad Mex. So.
I think that was the first Mad Mex.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, and actually, I went there with my brother after the birth of his two daughters. They were born, at McGee, and
Wonderful.
Afterwards, he would say, let's go get something to eat, and we both times went to Mad Mex. So lots of memories in that building.
Me too. Not. That's not the one we'd go with. That's my family's. That was my family's restaurant of choice. All of my kids. I have 4 kids. We have 4 kids. I did less of the work than Diane, my wife. But they grew up on Mad Mex happy hour wing specials.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good food.
Great wings.
And it grew into a small empire here.
Yes.
You went to that Mad Mex, and I can't remember. I don't think you were mentioned in the New Yorker article, but the incident was mentioned.
Well, they quoted me, so it was Mark Hauser
says
so you
this
were
happened.
Okay. It was one paragraph in the New Yorker.
I know, but still.
But it was really fun. Yes. So
okay, so let's
scene.
bounce back just a little bit. I know from when I talked to you, then you were born in Germany.
That's right.
Why?
Well, I'm a Western Pennsylvania Pittsburgher, proud Pittsburgher, lifelong. Except my parents, who both came from Newcastle, just about an hour and a half north of here, depending on how fast you drive. My dad was in the Army, so he was stationed in Germany for 2 years, and that coincided with the time that I was born. So I was born on an Army base near Frankfurt in Germany, and all my life I was fascinated by the idea of Europe because I had these pictures in my baby book of me at the Eiffel Tower. I'm in a baby carriage, or me in Bavaria near the Alps. And so I always wanted to go back, and I was always interested in Germany. And so I became involved once I came back to Pittsburgh after college and grad school, and I was a reporter for the Tribune Review, and eventually got involved with a group based in Washington, D.C. called the German Marshall Fund, which does professional transatlantic exchanges. And so I went overseas for a month and learned about different places in Europe and came back.
Like a fellowship.
Yeah, it's a fellowship, precisely.
And
so
is it primarily, you were a journalist.
I was.
Is it primarily political?
It was primarily people in media. It was for people early or mid-career who'd done something recently that they qualified for this fellowship. I'd written some stories about the justice system in Pittsburgh and jury duty, and so I got chosen. It was really exciting. I got to meet Greg Baer at the Grable Foundation. Then he was
also with you.
He was on the same fellowship as me, so we've been friends since then. But anyway, after I did that, I loved the program so much that I wanted to help Pittsburgh be part of it for Europeans. And so for 20 years now, about once a year, a group of about a half a dozen, mid-career early, let's say in their late 20s, early 30s, professionals from media, from government, from business, from nonprofits, who have been picked from various European countries, come to the United States for a month and go to 4 or 5 different cities. And Pittsburgh's one of those cities.
And you made that happen.
Yeah.
You're the one who said, you guys should come to Pittsburgh.
I was, yes. I think we deserve it. People were going to Cleveland, people were going to Detroit, wonderful cities, and I thought we should be part of the mix too. We've got a great story to tell and all kinds of fascinating aspects of our city.
So, your parents were in Germany,
Yes.
stationed there when you were born. Mm-hmm. How old were you when you moved back? Do you know?
Less than 1. I think before my first birthday.
You were back in Newcastle?
Yes, Newcastle, and then we moved to McCandless, so I spent about 5 or 6 years there, like kindergarten through 4th grade, and then they moved back because they had friends in Newcastle. But my folks loved Pittsburgh, my mom especially, and so we would come here all the time to see friends. Every Christmas we'd come to see the windows in Kaufman's department store and get our Farkerberries Snickerdoodle or whatever cookies. We were big fans of the KDK morning show, and my mom was a massive fan of QED.
Oh, cool.
Which we're on a diversion, but let's stick with this story if you don't mind.
I don't mind. We'll get back to Emmanuel Macron.
We're coming back to Macron. So anyway, so when I came back from Germany, I had a problem with my heart. There was a hole in my heart, a birth defect, and so I needed heart surgery. My mom, as I said, she was a big fan of WQED. She was a school teacher, and she was a massive fan of your former colleague, Fred Rogers. So we were big Mr. Rogers neighborhood fans, me and my younger brothers. And my mom had posters of the great TV auction in the house, in our rec room and stuff, and she was just a huge Fred Rogers fan. So when I went to get my heart surgery, she got word to Fred Rogers that her son, the Mr. Rogers fan, was in the hospital for a serious surgery, and could he come and visit? And so he came to my hospital room after I came out of surgery.
At Children's Hospital?
At Children's Hospital. And my mom always told me, I was kind of groggy, and I remember him being there and being excited, but I also just been in a surgery. So, but anyway, my mom remembers this story perfectly and would always share this with everybody who came to our house or anyone who liked Pittsburgh or whatever, that Fred had come up to me and he saw the bandages, and I was kind of weepy and sad because I was still sore and overwhelmed. And he touched the bandages on my chest and said, when I was little, I broke my leg, and the doctor put a cast on it. And I was worried that when they took the cast off, my leg wouldn't be there anymore. But don't worry, you'll be there. You'll still be okay. And she just thought, this is transcendent Fred Rogers magic. So anyway, that's my brush with WQED.
Oh, that's interesting.
Fred Rogers.
I've always thought of, Fred Rogers' unusual fears. Because he did a whole episode about you can't go down the drain. And I don't think I ever thought of that as a kid. I'm like, can I go down the drain? No, I was too big.
Yeah, he had a remarkable sort of conception of childhood and this
Right.
kind of specific. It is a little bit of an odd
Well,
fear.
I think, but that was his talent, was he somehow stayed in touch with his young self.
Certainly.
And, was able to share some of that. And, undoubtedly there are other people who have those fears. I just never identified with that one. But we're back to the German Marshall Fund.
And Emmanuel Macron.
And so he's not in the first batch of fellows to come from Europe to
No,
Pittsburgh.
that's right. The first batch was 2003. And,
You went when?
2002. I was supposed to go in 2001 in fall. In October of 2001, that's when my group was supposed to go. And then
But they
events
canceled.
transpired, and that year it was canceled and pushed back a year. So I went in fall of 2002. And so I traveled to Brussels, Belgium, and Hamburg, Germany, and Turin in Italy, and Warsaw in Poland, and then Berlin. And some of those cities are not cities that are normally on your tourism itinerary,
Right.
and yet they were fascinating. So that further made me believe Pittsburgh needed to be on this itinerary too, for Europeans.
I got to spend a week in Torino.
Yeah, gorgeous city.
Did you see the Shroud?
Yes. I wrote a story about it.
Oh, really? See, I think I went like 3 or 4 times. It was never open.
Yeah.
There was always some reason why it was closed. I spent a week in Turin and I never saw the Shroud. But I'm not sure that you actually see the Shroud. I think it's a replica or something.
Yeah, I saw the display of whatever it was. So, I mean, it's very faint, really. You can only make it out in the photo negatives.
Right.
But I talked to a syndenologist, which is the term for, so I think Sindone is the Italian for shroud, and so I spoke to one of the Catholic scientists that explains this. I was raised Catholic. My mom had a book about the shroud I had read voraciously as a kid. So I was,
It's
both
a
a
Station of the
journalism
Cross, isn't
mindset
it?
and, well, yeah, they laid in the tomb, I guess, right?
No, I mean, Mary Magdalene, isn't that her?
Well, that's different.
Is that
That's
different?
her veil that just gets his face. He had these.
Oh, the shroud is the
Yeah,
whole
the shroud's
shroud.
the whole burial shroud.
Yeah, see, my Catholic.
Well, mine's
I
lapsed a
mean,
bit
I'm
as well.
first through sixth grade in Catholic school anyway.
Uh-huh.
No, it's funny to think about Turin because in Turin, there's a big building. And I know that we're going to talk about buildings.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big building called La Mole.
The Mole Antonelli.
I knew it as La Mole. And
Yeah.
I remember asking, I was there for a television conference. And I remember asking one of the secretaries, I said, La Mole, what does that mean? And she goes, it means the big thing. Like you. You are the big thing. No. So I've always identified with that building, La Mole.
It's fantastic, and nobody knows about it. It's on some of the Euro coins, but
I didn't know
it's basically the brick Eiffel Tower, and it predates the Eiffel Tower. And it was, it was initially built to be a synagogue, but it's this, as you know, this towering, somewhat colonnaded, bizarre building that now is the Museum of Italian Cinema. And so we went inside when we went there, and I'll never forget the brilliant thing about it. I've never seen this anywhere else, but we went up to the observation deck up high, and you can see the Alps nearby. It's quite beautiful. But the elevator, so the atrium, the central part of this building is, I want to say like 8 stories, something. It's very tall. And the elevator goes up from the center, and it's glass, and it's free floating, just hung by cables. There's no shaft for the elevator. There's nothing to surround. It's just hanging from cable. It's a standard looking elevator. You get in and you go up. You just hoisted like from a crane until you can get to the central shaft. It's sort of Eiffel Tower-y shaped, or it looks like a spiked helmet or something. The mole. So yeah, you hang from. You're suspended 8 stories or more, I don't know, but it's huge and great. I love vertigo. That's one of my motivating, charges is just enjoying the weak knees and that sort of churn in your gut when you look down over a vast distance and see how much you can take it before you have to close your eyes.
Wow. And I think elevator technology has a lot to do with the kinds of buildings that you study, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, but before we get to the buildings, we're going to go back to Emmanuel Macron.
Wow, that was a fun
2003?
6, I think.
Oh, 2006.
2006,
So you
yeah.
go in 2002, you come back in 2003, and you say to the German Marshall Fund, you should be including Pittsburgh.
That's right.
And it takes them a year or two to say, okay, we'll come to Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah.
And are you always the organizer of that?
I have always been. So for 20 years now, I've been.
So you arrange an itinerary for
Indeed.
a group of European visitors who come to town, and from what I remember, it includes things like visits to the public theater as well as meeting the mayor and that kind of stuff.
Right. It sort of varies from year to year. We almost always go to the courts and watch a morning of courtroom proceedings. So we see about how juries are selected. We see opening arguments if we're lucky enough to start a trial, because in Europe that's not something that's common, that you have trial by jury. Usually they're trial by judges, like we also have, but they don't do juries so much in Europe. So they always find that interesting, and it's quite dramatic the way that an attorney will present his case to a judge, or rather to a jury of peers rather than to a professional judge, right? So that, the language is more, geared toward an audience whose education level you can't really tell and who are not professionally involved every day with cases. So it's more cinematic, it's more dramatic, and it's more fun to witness personally than watching a case where you just be presenting to a judge. So they always love that, but we also go to like Carnegie Mellon, or we go to robotics places. We always end on the Duquesne Incline, because that is the grand finale of Pittsburgh. Everyone needs to do the Duquesne Incline who visits, right?
I love that you specified the Duquesne Incline, because I am totally a devotee of the Duquesne Incline, but most people, I think, ride the Mon Incline. But I say...
We both know, no.
And it's included in one of my shows, a story about the couple that helped save it. And It's called the Duquesne Incline because it goes up to Duquesne Heights, which is the neighborhood at the top of the of Mount Washington. There, we think of it as Mount Washington, but there are neighborhoods within Mount Washington. And I remember one of them telling me, and this is the little factoid that I love to tell people. They have a good claim on those cars on the Duquesne Incline being the oldest mass transit vehicles in constant use in the world.
I think you're right.
Because they've changed the ones on the Mon Incline several times, even in the last, within memory. Mm-hmm. But those old cars, and I think they have a faint odor of Kennywood.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, the wood inside them, the wood trim,
exactly,
just has this bouquet.
It's the oil or something like that they put on it. Anyway.
I love the Duquesne Incline.
So that's where you always end.
Emmanuel Macron rode the Duquesne Incline. He got to see the city from the overlook.
Excellent. So he was just one of 6. Do you think he stood out at all? I mean, were you more aware of him?
There were 2 aspects of him. Well, the one we'll get to, but the other one is he was very stylishly dressed, but that's not unusual. I remember you often see the men with the scarf. That was not so much a look 20 years ago when I started doing this. You see it a little more now, but he was a foppishly attired finance ministry official.
Okay.
And at the time, and that's one thing I remember is that he was just, he was confident and good looking. He had a lot more hair then than he does now.
All right.
He wore his hair longer. But, he was attentive and interesting. We went and met Luke Ravenstahl, the youngest Pittsburgh mayor, so maybe this inspired him. Oh, I too could be a young leader. I think he was well on his way to thinking that.
He's probably in his late 20s or early 30s at the time?
Yeah, he's in his late 20s, not yet 30 at that time,
okay.
I think. I'm pretty sure of that. But anyway, the other thing I remember is towards the end of the trip, all of us getting together and having a beer one evening, and him sharing the story of how he married his high school drama teacher. So, that they were dating and all that interesting, fascinating love story.
Actually, I think I eventually, after having called you and asked you about this, wrote it up for Pittsburgh Magazine. And I think in that article, I mentioned the fact that you said that was at Fatheads on the South Side.
That's right.
I love the idea of Emmanuel Macron at Fatheads. I mean,
on
the
beers and burgers,
Incline.
Wigs. Absolutely. Well, so that was the other thing. But the story that made it into the New Yorker, those are all fun memories from him. And there's a picture from the Trib at the time of him like leaning in and having a conversation with Mayor Ravenstahl when we went and met him at his office. But the big story was I took them to Mad Mex. And I think, just in addition to all the meetings, we should have some fun. We should learn about American football. What is it exactly? And I draw up on the back of a cocktail napkin how a first down works so you can make some sense of it. We were watching Pitt play, and we got some nachos. And the salsa, I usually get that green bottle of habanero and spice up my salsa when I'm with the family for wing night. This is my habit, right? So I'm with these people, and I'm not even thinking about it, and I'm talking about football, and I have a separate little salsa bowl, the one that I'm using, and I put some of the green sauce in it, and I'm saying, here's how you throw the ball, here's how you get a first down. And he goes, what is that you're eating? I won't do a French accent because it's ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous when I do it. Anyway, and he says, what is that? I said, oh, never mind. Europeans are kind of, they don't tolerate spicy food as much as we do. It's not really part of their culinary culture, I have found. They also hate root beer. But anyway, they don't take to the spicy food. So I said, maybe, no, this is super spicy. You wouldn't like it. And he took that as a challenge. He said, give it to me. And so he has his nacho chip, and he poured like a teaspoonful of habanero salsa on the chip and says, and I'm trying to stop him. And he's, I will show you. I went to Africa once. I have no spicy food. And then his face just went beet red. And he goes, I have made a big mistake. And then he picks up a tumbler of water and just drains it, like on his water spilling on his scarf. So that's the story that's in the New Yorker.
I don't think I've ever, even having encountered that story before, the idea that Europeans aren't that crazy about really spicy food. I am. I love spice on everything. But it's such a great story, and I love the way it brings world politics to a corner in Oakland.
Yeah, I love that one. I've told that one to other Europeans coming anytime they want some of the spicy sauce. They say, well, be careful. It knocked out the president of France. I don't know if you're ready for it.
Well, if you like spicy stuff, I'll just, as a side note, recommend, and we've done a podcast with Torello from Steel City Salt Company, and they make a Trinidad scorpion salt, which I love. I mean, and that's the thing I buy every time I go in there. Trinidad scorpion salt. It's not, I think now there's so many hotter peppers than a habanero, but it just takes a wee pinch, and you can put it on, and it just brightens everything up to me. So
that sounds really good.
Yeah, it is. I love Trinidad scorpion salt from Steel City Salt Company in Millville. Anyway,
I'm going to look for it.
So even when you went as a fellow on the German Marshall Fund, you were working at the Trib.
Right. I worked there about 15 years as a reporter.
Okay, and that's where you met Mike Seat, who is eventually the link to me through his sister Manette.
Yes, indeed.
And I appreciate their help with all of this and meeting you. So you mentioned that you did a lot of stuff about jury duty. Was that sort of your bailiwick at the paper?
I bounced all over the place.
You were just a general reporter.
Yeah, I started out, doing the general early new fresh reporter stuff. With Mike Seat, we both for a time had we alternated weeks with a weekly humor column. So he and I once went and got. He took me for my first cocktail. I mean, I had other drinks, but he was the one, I should say my first martini. He suggested once, this would be a fun column. You should write about a martini. And I said, well, I've never had a martini. That's a weird old person drink.
That's an adult drink, yes.
I'm like 25 or whatever. And so we both went and got martinis at Houlihan's in Station Square. So, I mean, that was just, that Mike and I have been friends forever. I talked to him about old skyscrapers, and he's not really interested. And he talks to me about motorcycles, and I'm not really interested. But we like to talk about, new wave 80s music. That's our common interest we share.
Okay.
So anyway, I did that, and I did, I wrote about trends. I wrote about technology a lot. And then I did, demographic stuff, Sunday trends, how the city's changing, immigration stuff, all different kinds. And the justice system was one I came to a lot. So that's how the jury duty thing came up.
But eventually, somehow your attention turns towards buildings.
Yes, that's right.
So, I mean, were you writing architectural stuff too occasionally, or?
Not really, but after about 15 years at the Trib, I left that and went into public relations, working at Robert Morris University, and I didn't write for publication for a while, and then I missed it, and so I started writing freelance for Pittsburgh Magazine, and the first story that I did was about the interesting old skyscrapers of Pittsburgh that were designed by Daniel Burnham.
Okay.
And that was my first story.
He's from Chicago.
Yes, so he's a famous architect from Chicago. The two things he's done that people might have heard of is he was the organizer of and the grand director of the Chicago 1893 World's Fair. So he's the one who sort of assembled the plan for the World's Fair and put it together. He's already one of the first skyscraper architects. Then another thing.
And that's the same World's Fair with the Ferris wheel.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So it's a terrific, which
has nice Pittsburgh connections too.
Indeed, it does. Right, that was the tallest thing at the World's Fair, and by a Pittsburgh bridge engineer. So anyway, that's a big year in terms of architecture, in terms of what cities would look like in America, because that's where Americans all poured into this event. And while they were there, they would see Chicago off in the distance because it was, down the lakefront from Chicago, but nearby. And of course, they would visit. And that's where the skyscrapers were coming up, that had begun being built in the 1880s, because now we had elevators and we had steel frame technology. So anyway, that had a big impact on what skyscrapers would look like. And then Daniel Burnham also designed the Flatiron Building.
In New York City.
I think that's one of the most famous, certainly the most famous antique skyscraper, a term I like to use. So he built more skyscrapers in Pittsburgh than in any other city outside of his native Chicago. Not in New York, but Pittsburgh.
Okay, no, I don't want to go too far that way, but I think
Sure.
he's the Pennsylvanian.
Yes, that's one.
That's what I think
For sure.
that's Daniel Burnham.
Frick Building,
Oh, the Frick Building.
the Oliver Building, the Frick Annex, but the Oliver Building, that's one I think every Pittsburgher should know. It's the tallest skyscraper that Daniel Burnham ever designed.
Huh. So, and you used the term antique. I started to learn about these buildings and when I did a show called Downtown Pittsburgh. And I know that one of the architects we were working with, there's several in the show, said, we were blessed that Pittsburgh, rather than rip down its first generation skyscrapers, kept them. And so we have a really good collection, and that they're basically, if I remember correctly, someone said to me they're like 10 to 14 stories tall, and that's as high as an elevator could go. Is that right?
Well, yeah, exactly. This first usually I sort of constrain the term skyscrapers to 10 stories or more.
Okay.
But exactly right. It was not just elevators, but also how far you could pump water. And that technology vastly accelerated. So, I mean, it was 10 stories was a lot of stories in 1890. But, by 1900, 20 stories, 40 stories. By the time we got to the Woolworth Building in 1913, it's like 50 plus stories, and that's the tallest skyscraper in the world until the Chrysler Building comes along about, almost 2 decades later. So, I mean, the term skyscraper, I think, is funny where it comes from. It's actually a baseball word. It was the word that people used to describe. It originally comes from sailing. It's the top sail on a mast, the skyscraper.
Okay.
But then it got used for a lot of other things, and it was popularly used for like a deep shot over the right field or the left field fence in baseball was a skyscraper.
The ball going out.
Yeah, when you hit it high and far, that's a skyscraper. So journalists started using that to describe these new super tall buildings that would transform every city in America within a matter of a couple of decades. Imagine every building in your city is 5 stories tall, because that's as tall as anyone will walk up a flight of stairs. And then suddenly there's this new innovation that allows you to have more flights, and so now you can increase the value of your land. So anyone who owns land wants as many stories as you can get, because you can lease all of them and make a lot of money. And so suddenly your city of church steeples and 5-story buildings is a city of 10, 12, 15, 18, 20-story buildings. And that happened here in Pittsburgh in the course of about a decade. We went from 2 buildings over 10 stories to more than a dozen between 1900 and 1910.
Oh, that early.
And to me, many of them along 4th Avenue where the banks are, but also, that you can still see one of the oldest one is the Park Building with all those guys holding the roof up.
Telemanies.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the name for those.
Nice. That's
not soldiers, but they
Atlas
look like
type.
bodybuilders
Yeah.
holding up the roof of that building.
So, I mean, they look old to us now because when people design these new buildings, I mean, they are old, of course, like say antique skyscrapers, but when people were designing this brand new technology of super tall buildings, taller than anyone has ever seen before, what are we supposed to put on the outside of these? And so at the time, thanks largely in part to that World's Fair in Chicago, it became kind of accepted that what grand pieces of architecture should have on the outside is what was on the outside of old grand pieces of architecture, like Roman and Greek temples.
Right.
So they used that. In France, there's the École des Beaux-Arts, right? The School of Fine Arts. And that was the first big architecture school. Most of the prominent architects went there. And so they absorbed these ideas that you should make these buildings look like classical or Renaissance style architecture. So when we look at them now, they look like old temples, but you need to sort of remind yourself that these in 1900 were brand new, were flashy high tech. And this is a time when you're also starting to see the first cars, the first airplanes.
The world is changing.
Light bulbs, we think we're going through a technological revolution, and in many ways we are, right? But those folks did too. And we don't just think about hoop skirts and weird bicycles with one big tire and one little one. Like, they were also seeing their entire world go through an upheaval like no one had seen before in such a short time.
Right. No, actually, when you mentioned the World's Fair there in Chicago, or the Columbian Exposition, I think
Yes.
it was.
Right.
That was also where Westinghouse demonstrated that alternating current could work. Mm-hmm. And I mean, yeah, when you think of all those, new ideas and new things. And because Westinghouse and Edison were fighting so much, Edison didn't want to give his light bulbs for that event, so Westinghouse went into making light bulbs, and they were used there in Chicago.
No, that's right.
All those factors combined, and so I'm going to bounce back to your. You write this thing up about these buildings in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
And it just grows from there.
Yeah, I love the topic. So I started doing some history. I've done other history stuff and Pittsburgh stuff. I mean, I love the city, and it's got a fascinating history. But I shortly after, a few years after doing that, initial story about the Burnham buildings, I started writing a column for Pittsburgh Magazine that was called Multi-Stories. And the idea was each month I'd write about a building that, an antique skyscraper from Pittsburgh whose story wasn't very well known. And by going back into the archives of old newspapers from 100 years ago, you can find out a lot. So, I mean, a lot of Pittsburghers know the story about the Frick building and Henry Clay Frick and Andrew Carnegie, who was the first skyscraper in Pittsburgh, and it's where the Kaufman's warehouse is now. It had no windows, right? But that was first a skyscraper for Andrew Carnegie's steel company. And so a lot of Pittsburghers know that after they had their falling out, Frick built his Frick building by Daniel Burnham next door to block the sunlight out of the windows of the Carnegie building. But there are so many other buildings that also have fun stories like that, but we don't know these people's stories. So I started writing stories like that. The first one that inspired me was the Arrett building.
I love the Arrett building, yes.
Isn't it? Yeah. It's such a fun building. It's so strange.
It has a beautiful marble lobby with all kinds of mosaics and...
Yes. And stripes, right?
Right. And somehow we hooked up with the guy who was the custodian there, and he took us all around and showed us all the things he loved about that building and took us up to the roof. And
with those crazy shouting faces on the cornice line.
Right.
So, well, it's a unique building. I've always admired it. And so I was looking about, on the internet, looking at Wikipedia, what do I know about? And all I could find about Arrett is James Arrett was an Irish immigrant in the insurance business. But when I started looking at old newspapers, I found out so much more. And what I found out is that he is the bathtub king of Pittsburgh.
I was going to say, he has something to do with plumbing, I think. He starts what becomes American standard.
That's right. He made his fortune on bathtubs. So he was originally a fire insurance company, and he insured a foundry on the north side that did plumbing for, sanitary ware. So like plumbing coated with enamel for drinking water and various fixtures for that. And then sometimes like toilets and sinks and stuff like that. And so this is the late 1800s. He comes up with this idea that if you spray white enamel gloss on the inside of an iron tub, it will look really shiny and be durable, and people will want it. And he's right. This was massive. This was a huge hit. So there are bathtub factories on the north side. I think Beaver Falls had another one. He starts this bathtub production empire here in Pittsburgh and becomes super rich. And the Arrett building was not only an insurance business and other offices, but it was also the headquarters of Standard Sanitary, which becomes American Standard.
No, actually, and I think I know why I know that. I mean, anytime you see Standard on a toilet or a urinal or something like that, it's connected back to that and the Arrett building downtown. I don't think a lot of people think about that.
No.
But
it's fun, right? And this is a story.
But I learned that at the History Center in the men's room. They had a little plaque that that explained that. In the ground floor men's room at the Heinz History Center in the Strip.
It's such a great museum.
Yeah, so
one of my favorites.
I hate superlative questions. I'm not going to ask you, what's your favorite building in Pittsburgh? But you must have a few. Now, you mentioned the Arrett building. What are a few of your favorites?
To answer your question, the Arrett building has always been my secret favorite, and it's in my book. So my book came out of the Multi-Stories column. I did a book about all the skyscrapers
but it's not just
around
Pittsburgh.
the country. Yes, so I thought, okay, if Pittsburgh's got these great skyscraper stories, but no one else, few in Pittsburgh may even appreciate them, then every city in America must have a few of these skyscrapers, and indeed they do. So here it is. This is the Arrett building is on the cover, right next to the Flatiron building and the Tribune Tower in Chicago is the Arrett building. And all these pictures come from the souvenir postcards 120 years ago that people used to buy when they would
Postcards are the best.
when they would go to these buildings and say, you must see. In fact, there was a funny, the one in the Heinz History Center's archives said they have an old postcard someone mailed to, I think, his daughter, and he writes on the front cover, "This is going some," which it's fun. You see this old slang. This was the way of saying, this is super cool, or this is wonderful, this is amazing. This is going some. The Arrett building is going some. So some of the other buildings that I love here in Pittsburgh, I love the balcony from the Coppers building. Up on the 29th floor, I take my tours there. You could see down into the Strip District and see, the Cathedral of Learning, which is another one of my favorites. Of course, that building is a classic.
Even though Frank Lloyd Wright hated it.
Well, he did, but he hated everything. He hated Pittsburgh, right? And he's just jealous because after he got his commission for Falling Water and to do Edgar Kaufman's office, he didn't get any more of his commissions. I mean, he would have destroyed the point with that crazy spaceship design he had.
Yeah.
So, but he's obviously a genius architect. But what did he say about Pittsburgh? Someone asked him, I was just telling this story yesterday, to these a group of Australians that I was showing around the city from Sydney, and they were doing a Frank Lloyd Wright tribute, pilgrimage from Milwaukee to Taliesin, however you say the name of his place in Chicago. Yeah. But they were in Buffalo, and then they came to Falling Water. And anyway, I was showing them around Pittsburgh before they go back to Australia, and I found this quote from a story you wrote in Pittsburgh Magazine. You were writing about Frank Lloyd Wright in Pittsburgh.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it was 2016 or whatever in Pittsburgh Magazine.
Could be, yeah.
But anyway, the quote, it was a great one, is they said, "What could we do to improve Pittsburgh, Mr. Wright?" And he said, "Abandon it and start over." And that's before he didn't get his commissions. So.
Right.
So anyway, he didn't like it here.
Well, when I first came to Pittsburgh, I had worked with, I had a friend in South Carolina. I worked for public television in South Carolina, and another producer there at our station, Tim Carrier, had done a story about, I think, the 3 Frank Lloyd Wright houses in South Carolina, one in ruins, but the other 2, and I think the guy who ran Domino's Pizza was trying to save them. He was a Frank Lloyd Wright fan, the founder of Domino's Pizza. That's my memory. But when I announced that I was going to come to Pittsburgh to work at WQED, Tim said, "As soon as you get there, let me know, because I desperately want to see Falling Water." And so he contacted the people, and it's not quite, it wasn't quite as commercialized as is now, where there's an entrance and, and a visitor center and all that kind of stuff. But he contacted them, and they said, "We'd love to have you come take a look." And there was no one else there that day, and he had brought one of our cameramen, not to shoot it, but just because he was interested too. Herman and Tim came shortly after I came to Pittsburgh. And what I remember is it was great. Go anywhere you want, see anything you want. And then at the end of the day, they were ready to go home, and they said to Tim, "Is there anything you haven't seen that you want to see?" And he goes, "I would love to see it at dusk." And we're approaching, and they said, "Oh, okay. Listen, here's the keys.
Stop it.
When you leave, put them in the mailbox on your way out."
No, I don't believe it.
And we did.
That's amazing.
I know. We had the keys to Falling Water.
Oh.
And we stayed till it got dusky and took some pictures and all that.
Wow.
And then put the keys in the mailbox at the end of the driveway, and we'll pick them up tomorrow.
Wow.
So, I don't know if they do that anymore.
I can't imagine, but my goodness, what a terrific opportunity that you had.
But you did this multi-stories across America, and that's
Yes.
just, can you sort of say, how many trips is that? And do you visit multiple cities as you go?
So I did most of the reporting for multi-stories just before the pandemic came out. In fact, so there's 36 different cities represented. There's 55 buildings, 50 in the United States and then 5 outside. The book was published in 2020. So the last trip I did was to go up to Seattle and Vancouver. There's a building from Seattle, a marvelous, my favorite antique skyscraper in the country, frankly, just fun, called the Smith Tower. But Smith was a company that made shotguns in upstate New York, and then not Smith & Wesson, but a different Smith shotgun company. And they, like Remington, another New York arms manufacturer, used that machine tool technology, that fine machining technology, and shifted to a brand new high-tech industry in 1880-ish, typewriters. So the people that manufactured
Smith
guns...
Corona?
Smith Corona is the Smith building. The people that started, it was a shotgun company that made the natural transition to shotguns. But anyway, it's a bizarre,
you let
crazy
me read
building.
that, that is, I mean, the story of the men behind these buildings is always as fascinating as any building story could be.
I agree entirely. That's part of what motivated me to write the book, is that we usually focus on architectural term. I mean, when you talk about old buildings, you talk about their architecture, certainly, and you talk about the architect, and those are all worthy topics, and I include some of that in the book. But almost never do we talk about who wanted this building and paid for it, and that is really essential, not just for where the money came from, but also for what those people, what the clients wanted. And their stories are usually, interesting and inspiring. These are tycoons and entrepreneurs, rags to riches stories in many cases, and they're relevant today. So I give talks today. I like to talk to groups about how this is, inspiring to us today as we try to figure out what we're going to do in technology and in the business realm. They faced the same sort of struggles, and they had to persevere, these people, in order to build these fortunes in most cases. And so the skyscrapers are kind of their legacies in stone and steel, as one person writing about the book said. But anyway, it was lots of trips. And the last one was to Seattle just as COVID was breaking. So we went to Seattle as the first COVID cases, my wife and I did. We'd never been.
Okay.
And we had to make a decision whether we were willing to risk it, and I'm really glad we did. It was, it's a fantastic city, and Vancouver is even more beautiful. And so, yeah. And
I've never been to Vancouver. I've been to Seattle, and
it's worth the trip.
And you haven't lost interest. You're working on a new book,
That's right.
or you're done? Are you almost done?
No,
or-
well, we're about to release. We'll release this year a coffee table book based on the project that you people can already see, and that is the High Rises project. So, just briefly, what that is there's this architecture school graduate from Drexel out in Philadelphia, and he's 25 years old. His name's Chris Hytha, and he's also a really creative artistic photographer. And so he started a project. He'd done one project already where he took photographs of the row houses in West Philadelphia where he lives on his way to school, and then made them into a series of these unique sort of portraits of buildings. And he cranks up, the Adobe Photoshop, makes these things very
Pop.
Yeah, they really pop. That's the way to say it. So he decides he wants to do the same thing with old Art Deco skyscrapers. And I wanted to write about Art Deco skyscrapers and had been sort of trying to figure out how I would do a book about Art Deco. There's not Art Deco in my book because if I did, then half of them at least would have been, because everyone loves Art Deco, right? So I thought, this is book 2. Anyway, I get a call from this guy saying, hey, I'm going to do a series of these. I'm going to use a drone to make these unique images, and I've got some right here. So it's done with a drone to, as you can see, here's some Pittsburgh ones. He basically flies up the side of the building and takes a series of photographs and then stitches them together so they look a little bit like Wes Anderson.
Right. Okay.
That's a gift for you, for your studio.
Thank you. That is beautiful. So it's the Cathedral of Learning.
Yes.
Coppers.
Yes.
This is the building that has the notorious room at the top that there's all kinds
That's
of
a fun
sexy
story.
stories about.
All hogwash, but yes, that's true.
All hogwash?
That's another one of the fun myths I like to...
But the name of this building is...
This is the Keenan originally, Keenan building. Now it's called Midtown Towers.
Okay, and this is the golf building.
Yeah, the golf building, exactly. So what he's doing is he's flying a drone up, and every floor, Chris is taking a new picture of the building.
And then he stitches them.
Because if you just took a picture from a helicopter right here, it would have perspective.
Right.
Whereas here it looks, like I said, kind of like a Wes Anderson movie set.
Flat.
Very flat, like an elevation drawing. And then he stitches them all together and corrects it, and then takes some pictures of the sky from the drone above. And then he called me and said, I want each of these buildings to have their story. So can you research the story and write like you did for multi-stories? So this is called High Rises, and you can see it online now. There's, I think we've got more than 40 cities now. We've got closing in on 150 buildings. And just like with my book, these are from not just the standard, the New York, Chicago, but we've been coast to coast.
So how do we find this online?
You go to highrisescollection.com.
High with a GH?
HIGH. highrisescollection.com. And for each, you can sort them too. See all the buildings from the 1910s. See all the buildings from the South. See all the buildings, that are Art Deco or are Gothic style. And each one, you've got like a short story. You've got their vital statistics, how many stories they are, how tall, but also, and the architects, but you hear the little stories behind them. And I think
it sounds great. No, I will look forward to that. And I didn't know that I could already do it online, but we'll let everybody know that through our website too.
Absolutely. It's fun. You can browse through the whole thing. And then there are prints like this available.
And this photographer just knew you from your book.
Indeed.
That's
yes,
cool.
That's right. He, I guess he saw the book or he saw my website, hausertalks.com.
All right.
And he gave me a buzz and said, hey, would you be interested in getting involved with this project? And he came out here. We met and had brunch at the Speckled Egg, and I showed him around. And we went up in the Oliver building, and I gave him my spiel. And lo and behold, for more than a year now, we just got back on our last trip. But it's fun to discover the skyscrapers in cities that no one would know about.
Right.
So last year when we were up in Chicago, we also went up to St. Paul and Minneapolis, but we stopped in Rochester, Minnesota, where the Mayo Clinic is, which is a gorgeous Art Deco skyscraper with a tile roof.
The Mayo Clinic is a skyscraper?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And it's tremendous. It's one of my favorites in the collection. Buffalo has the City Hall in Buffalo is on my phone. It's my screensaver, so you can get these as like phone screensavers too. We were just in Missouri and Nebraska, so we went to St. Louis, Kansas City, and Lincoln, Nebraska.
I think I saw on your Facebook page you gave a congratulations for the state government building.
Yeah, the state capitol is an Art Deco skyscraper in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's like the only skyscraper in Lincoln, Nebraska, but it's good.
And it's funny because the Lincoln Highway goes through Lincoln, Nebraska, but I don't remember that. I don't know how much time we spent in Lincoln, Nebraska when we were doing the Lincoln Highway, but
we've seen so many wonderful buildings, and it's just fun to uncover their stories, and it's fun to share these stories with people because just like we're proud of some things in Pittsburgh, and we're even more proud when we learn some of this Pittsburgh history that isn't as widely recognized. There's so much more to discover in these cities across the country, and it's just wonderful, a beautiful era of design.
I totally agree with you, and I love that you get to do this and that you're doing this. And I know that we could talk all day. But before we wrap up, I want to talk about the fact that usually you have a bow tie on.
This is so.
And I did a thing for the 48-hour film competition. I don't know if you know that. It's when young filmmakers...
I've heard of it.
Yeah, and they get an assignment on a Friday, and they have till Monday to make a little movie. I think it's a maximum of like 8 or 9 minutes long. They don't know what the subject's going to be or what they have to include. They're like all kinds of rules. It's a competition, but it's really fun. And some guys that were working here at QED, I'm going to guess 10 years ago, Andy Kellerman and Mike Rubino, who's part of the Arcade Comedy Theater downtown, they were working on one of these together, and they asked me if I would do a voice, and I said I'd love to do a voice, and they said, would you act? I said, sure, if you want me to do something. And they called me on Saturday morning and said, you said you'd act, and we need you to come down with a suit on, and we need you to get us on top of a building in the Strip District. And I said, well, okay, I think I can make some calls about that. And I don't know why. I said to them, do you want me to wear a necktie or a bow tie? I mean, I have no idea why I asked that. And they said, oh, bow tie. And so I wore a bow tie that day. And I just, so many people commented on it. I loved it. I've never worn a necktie since. I made that leap for this 48-hour film competition. I played fun. Ricky the Rat. And, I've worn a bow tie. And there was a time shortly thereafter when there were a lot of bow ties. You saw bow ties in all the men's stores and everything. Right. But that era seems to be over.
I think you're right.
It's hard to find them
It was
now.
just George Will for the longest time, wasn't it?
I think
I never wore one
Tucker
either.
Carlson even
wore
bow ties for a while.
Indeed.
But you know what? Fred Rogers, he wore a necktie on the show, but in life, he always wore a bow tie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
so,
that.
like, if you saw him anywhere but in the show, he had on a bow tie. So,
Wow.
There's a good tradition in this
Yeah.
building, certainly, of bow ties.
Oh, that's fun.
And
Well, I mean, I didn't really wear a bow tie ever, but I didn't know how to tie one or do anything what to do with how to do it. But when I started doing my tours of the skyscrapers downtown, which I still do every year, people can find it on
just
my website.
once a year, or are they on?
Sometimes a couple, 2 or 3, but the problem is we don't really have any public buildings that allow you to go on the roof. So on my weekend tours, I have good relationships with the people like especially the Coppers building, but also others that we visit. But it needs to be a weekend thing, and I can't really ask them to have their staff there watching us bring people through. But I do it several times a year, and so people can find out when by looking at my website, hausertalks.com, or antiqueskyscrapers.com gets you there too. But I started wearing the bow ties for that and for when I give talks and give tours, and it's just a look. It's kind of fun. It's and especially when you're done. My favorite is when you're done, and if it's a clip-on, you can't do this. But if you learn how to tie it, then you can pop it, and then you're James Bond, right? You got that.
I early on, someone said to me, "It's the exact same knot that you tie in your shoe."
I suppose
It is. It's a bow. It's
Okay.
just like a bow that you tie in your shoe.
I hadn't thought of it
I mean,
that way.
it's a little more complicated because you have to pull the ends and make it match and all of that.
Right.
But
Well, in addition to the spiffy bow tie, another spiffy piece of sartorial, what do you say, accoutrement or whatever,
Okay.
is these wonderful socks that you gave me. I have worn. These are along with the bow tie, I almost always wear my skyscraper socks.
Wow.
That you gave me these.
I love goofy socks.
Yeah, they're fantastic. So I have brought some gifts for you.
Oh, okay. But
So, well, first, I would like you to have one of these Pittsburgh high-rises
hey,
prints
it would be excellent.
that you can have for your office or home or whatever
Okay.
you like. So, and you can enjoy that.
All
And then
right.
I have brought you a copy, obviously, of my book.
All right. I think I have one of these already, and I think I still have the. You sent it to me. I think I just printed. You sent me a file because you wanted me to do a blurb.
Yes, and it's right there on the top
Right
in the
there
back.
in the book. What a book. It's amazing and fun. So
Thank
all
you.
of this is just a
Thank you.
continuation of this blurb.
Indeed. And then finally, I wanted to give you, this is from Wiggle Whiskey, and I wanted to pass along a greeting from Wiggle to local Pittsburgh distiller, as you well know. But the fellow that helped me with the selection is Derek Minto, who's a stand-up comic.
I was going to say, I know him from the arcade, I think.
Yes, indeed. Now, he has a good Rick Seaback story. I have I think I may have told you, I actually, before I tell you Derek's story, and sticking with our theme of wildly diverting from what we started to say, but I actually had a brief appearance on a Rick Seaback documentary almost
you
30
mentioned
years
this
ago.
yesterday when I called you.
So I appeared on, and my wife and I and our daughter appeared on the strip show, and I can even show you real quick because I pulled it up yesterday.
And took a still frame.
Well, yes, it's you never see my face, so I could be lying,
But it's
but
your
I
wife
promise
and you.
I'm not. And what you see here is, here we go. I'll spin it sideways. And this is, this
Oh,
is right
coming
after the
out of
Great
St.
Banana.
Stan's.
This is my wife and me and our our first child.
Wow.
There's a little shot for 3 seconds of us walking out the door of St. Stan's just after you talk about the Great Banana explosion that blew the spires off of that Polish church.
It will inspire me. You probably, I don't know why you would know this about me, but I have great hoarder tendencies.
Oh, yeah?
I have that footage. I have the original.
Ooh.
We probably have much more of you walking out of there
Well-
than made the show.
I'm sure. Yeah, I remember the shoot. Well, we were just there for church, and it was pretty exciting, and everyone was flipping out in my family. And then you can't see our face. The only face you see is my daughter, which I think was good judgment on the part
cool.
of your team. But anyway,
I
so
did not know that. That's
that's
excellent.
my Rick Seaback.
I love to meet
story.
people who are in the shows. Okay.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. This is so much fun. Another chance to. Well, we've had cocktails on your porch during COVID.
I was going to say, and did you bring me that file? I think that's you were asking. You said, "Would you read this and write?"
Oh
a
yes,
blurb?"
that's when we were talking about
Did
it.
you? And I see. I couldn't remember.
Probably, yeah, I probably.
But I
brought-
said I think I have a vague recollection of Mark Hauser on my front porch during the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. So that we had carrot cake Oreos you would provide because we were talking about the new carrot cake Oreos and whether they were worth a darn. So we had carrot cake Oreos, and then I had a pandemic cocktail made with McLaughlin Distillery's Devil Juice. That was the Hickory Daiquiri.
Okay.
So we did that, and you had laid out quite a nice spread. So this is for you, and is from Derek Minto. He gives his greetings. His Rick Seaback story is that he, inspired by one of your documentaries, he shared a lot of its information on a first date and impressed her because he believes, impressed. So you got him a good date, let's
Excellent.
say.
So cool. This is a saffron amaro. Wow, a liqueur put out by Wiggle. Excellent.
It is with, I think, sorghum apples and saffron, and it's pretty high proof too for amaro. But I think you go straight with that, or make a nifty cocktail.
No, I like amaros very much, and I don't know if you know the whole story of Super Punch.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't. Tell me
an
that.
amaro from Italy that's imported only to Pittsburgh. That's a whole nother story.
Oh!
Anyway, well, Mark, thank you so much. Thank you for being on Gumbands. Thanks for helping to hold all of Pittsburgh's buildings together. And, I wish you total luck in everything.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's really been a great pleasure to spend some time with you again here. And
My pleasure, totally.
Wonderful. Thanks.
This Gumbands podcast is made possible by the Buell Foundation, serving southwestern Pennsylvania since 1927, and by listeners like you. Thank you.